Before we conclude this series, we'd like to give thanks to our viewers for taking this important step to learn more about Mascot theory and settler colonialism. We believe that everyone should have the opportunity to learn about settler colonialism and its prominent place in society in order to make Indigenous lives better. In our first episode, we gave a brief introduction to settler colonialism and Indigenous issues. We lay out how Mascot theory may seem like a trivial issue, but is actually very important and contributes to settler colonialism just as much as many other Indigenous issues. In the second episode, we learn about settler colonial theory, and we pave the way for the rest of the series. We explain that settler colonialism is a current and ongoing system that is all too often made out to be a singular event of the past. The system is constantly being reproduced, and we explain that this is essential knowledge when delving into Mascot theory.
In episode 3 of our series, we explain the explicit problems with Indigenous mascots, how they are harmful to Indigenous peoples in the forms of stigma and self-esteem. They are made out to seem like savages or unworthy. We discuss how this negatively impacts Indigenous peoples and how they aren't taken as seriously when dealing with other Indigenous issues. We provide examples on how these mascots can lead to misconceptions for other members in society, inevitably causing a setback in the system. In episode 4, we provide real-life examples of Indigenous mascots and use them to show how they contribute to settler colonialism, how these mascots were dealt with, and finally, how people feel about them.
In the most recent episode of our series, episode 5, we discuss how Indigenous mascot issues are comparable to other Indigenous issues such as boil water advisories, missing and murdered Indigenous women, and unequal access to healthcare. We also discuss how Indigenous mascots negatively affect efforts to solve these issues.
Our series provides valuable information on Indigenous mascot theory, and finally, how it relates to the bigger picture of settler colonialism. Lastly, we feel it is important to touch on reconciliation. For our conclusion, we will call on Pam Palmater's discussion, Why do Indigenous topics cause such emotional discomfort? We will use this in order to explain why reconciliation is such a hard topic to learn about, yet essential. Palmater discusses the negative reaction she experiences when teaching Indigenous issues. People get upset, some people get angry, and some people get extremely defensive. People have likely not taken courses on Indigenous history and likely have not seen the facts of Indigenous oppression. People represent the general public, which is important to note, because most people have not been able to learn these hardships. Palmater says she does not apologize for being straightforward when teaching Indigenous history. It is an important part of reconciliation. States, it's not reconciliation if it feels good.
We feel it is important to end this series with a question rather than a definitive conclusion, because this is not the end of our education and is definitely not the end of our journey to learn more about settler colonialism. We question what the next steps are for our viewers and ourselves. Will we become advocates, continue to further our education, pay closer attention to media representations, or take an entirely different route altogether?
We thank our viewers for choosing to listen in and educate themselves on these issues. And we hope you will take the next steps to look deeper, assist Indigenous peoples on their journey to break down the settler colonial system.